And now, stand-up community subscribers and listeners from around the globe, it's time to Stand Up with Pete Dominic, where we ask the important questions that impact you, your family, and your community. Such as, will rising interest rates impact home improvement loans for a new outhouse gazebo? And will COVID restrictions be lifted in time for me to finally board my flight for the Mile High Club on Love Cloud? And now, the podcast host whose Mile High membership never expires in his garden, Pete Dominic!
That's right. If you mean I get high in my garden, you would be right, Petco. That's right, on my own supply. Hello, my friends, and welcome to the show. This is Stand Up, and I am Pete, and I'm happy to have you here. I have an awesome show for you today. I have three guests join me today. Heath Druzin joins me for the first time. He is a journalist, and now he has a new podcast called Extremely American about extremists in America. It's a great conversation and a really interesting podcast. Then before that, I have the great Cauvin, who is on tour of the country. Many of you have gone out to see him at his dates. We had a great conversation about what he's been doing and experiencing, and some culture and some comedy and some censorship stuff. It was very good, as always, with JL. And finally, at the end, I reached out to our Canadian correspondent, Carlo Sgro, who is a longtime listener and subscriber of the show. Love Carlo. Really nice guy, of course. I mean, he lives in Canada. How couldn't he be? Just outside Toronto, as a matter of fact. Because yesterday on the podcast, I asked, what the hell's going on in Canada with these protests and all that? Carlo sent me this long, detailed email, and I said, why is that wasted just on my eyes? Can I call you? And I called Carlo, and he joins me on the air for the first time, and he was great. He's our new Canadian correspondent for Stand Up. If you are an expert on something, if you want to talk about something, you want to come on the show desperately, you think you've got a real important, thoughtful story to tell or share, argument, point, you name it, then reach out to me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. Some of my greatest guests have started out as listeners, that's for sure. All right, including Eric Siegel, who I'm going to talk to tomorrow about this latest Supreme Court shadow docket decision on redistricting. And it's a bad one, so we'll do that tomorrow. But today, three guests. How about that, everybody? And how are you doing here on the second day of the week in the first week, or I guess second week, I should say, of February, yeah? Are we okay? Are we getting ready for, what are we getting ready for? I'm going to get ready, I think, maybe for a couple of days off this week. I am burnt out, emotionally exhausted. I mentioned that this past weekend I just sat around. I never do that, and I didn't love doing that. I felt guilty doing that. My back hurt doing that if I'm not always kind of moving, exercising. I think I get depressed a little bit, certainly, but it's just been a lot for a long time. I think I just need a few days off. You know me, I threaten and maybe I won't do it, but I'm just giving you a heads up. I am definitely going skiing with Carrie Williams this Thursday. Longtime listener Carrie, I'm finally going to meet him in person. We're going to go up to the Catskills. Very much looking forward to that. But we'll still hang out on Thursday night. Hope to see you there if you're a stand-up subscriber. But how about we get to the news, shall we? I'm already 4 minutes in, and I still haven't started with today's news dump in the last 24, so let's get it going right now. All right, well, COVID obviously isn't gone. I haven't been talking about it much here on the show, haven't been doing a lot of COVID news updates, but frustrated Americans like you and me are moving on anyway, many people might say. School mask mandates are falling in states across the Northeast. Nobody wants to talk about the idea that we might get back to some semblance closer to what we might have described at one point as remotely near, may I dare say, normal, but for fear that another variant will lock us all back up and create concern and fear and guilt and shame and all kinds of other issues that obviously come with every spike in COVID. But wait, what's this? One slight green shoot? Is that the sun coming through the clouds? Is that the governor of New Jersey, a very populated, highly populated state, announcing that the kids of New Jersey schools won't have to wear masks? Is that what I'm seeing?
Because of the dramatic decline in our COVID numbers. Effective Monday, March 7th, the statewide school mask mandate will be lifted. Additionally, we will lift the statewide mandate in all child care settings. Later this week, we will extend the public health emergency by 30 days to allow for this mask mandate to continue until then and then be responsibly lifted.
I think New York might be next, and we'll see what happens around the Northeast and around the country. And that's a really important thing, of course, for our young folks who are in public schools and schools in general, inside in general, to get back to some normalcy, to not have to wear a mask in school. I wonder if anybody's going to miss that. I wonder if any young people are going to miss that for any number of reasons. Anyway, all right, well, here is another big story from yesterday where the Supreme Court in a 5-4 decision allowed a congressional map drawn by Alabama Republicans to remain in place. So the Supreme Court allowed a racist voting law to remain in place. And this is exactly what we knew would happen when the Voting Rights Act was gutted. It freezes this lower court ruling that said the map likely violated the Voting Rights Act by diluting the political power of black voters. Here is Ayman Moyadeen with the breaking news on MSNBC yesterday.
And some breaking news to share with you from the Supreme Court just within the last hour. In a 5-4 decision, the court is allowing Alabama to use its new congressional district map. The highest court's decision halts a lower court order that required the state to redraw its map after it said it diluted black votes and was in violation of the Voting Rights Act. Chief Justice John Roberts sided with the liberal justices in dissent.
All right, well, I'll be talking with Eric Siegel on the show about that tomorrow. If you have any questions, concerns that you want to raise, obviously send them my way. And speaking of race, I thought this was a really interesting clip. Here's activist and author Kim Latrice Jones on what she thinks is the motivation behind critical race theory bans. This is on probably one of the most popular radio shows in the country, I think at this point, The Breakfast Club. And I think that Kim Latrice Jones just absolutely nails it here. I love the way that she breaks it down.
And you see in Florida, they're saying if you make white kids feel uncomfortable or white people feel uncomfortable with whatever it is that you're teaching in school, like that's...
Ain't this the same people that be calling folks snowflakes?
Yeah.
These the same folks.
Absolutely.
Calling people snowflakes, talking about people weak and soft. And now you talking about it's going to hurt your feelings to learn about the truth. The truth is Ruby Bridges, who integrated school, is only in her 60s. So what it is you don't want your grandkids to know that you spit at her.
That's right.
You don't want your grandkids to know that you witnessed lynchings.
That's right.
You don't want your grandkids to know that some of those family heirlooms that's in the will are things from atrocities that happen to black people. We want to be convinced that it was so long ago. It was last night.
Absolutely.
It's today.
That's right. That's right.
It's today.
How did listening to that clip make you feel? Did it make you feel uncomfortable? Make you sad? Did it hurt your feelings? Did it make you feel guilty? Like it's your fault that people see things that way and feel that way? If it did, I don't know. What can we do about it? What do you think about that feeling? What does it mean to you? Yeah, Kim Latrice Jones. I like her. I like what she said, and I'm gonna try to get her right here on the old show. Talk to her more and learn more from what she has to offer the conversation, because that was good. I really liked that. I thought that was real straightforward. I think I'll share that on my community Facebook page and watch people's heads explode. All right, well, now I want to talk to you about football. Well, not football, but because it certainly ties in with race, and I think it's super important. You got Roger Goodall of the NFL coming out with a statement yesterday saying the results of efforts to promote diversity within head coaches is unacceptable. In the memo, he says the league will reevaluate all policies, guidelines, and initiatives related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, including as they relate to gender. The league will also retain outside experts to assist in this review, and they'll also continue writing "End Racism" in the end zones. They think that'll make a big difference, and continue to disproportionately penalize black players' celebrations, like pretty overtly, apparently. It's pretty good data on that, by the way. All right, well, here's a package put together by a bunch of people over at the big corporate ABC News, Good Morning America, which I think does a decent job offering context. It's about a minute from Good Morning America setting it up, and then I'll get you some reaction from the great Stephen A. Smith, who does a perfect job illustrating the main point about all of this. But first, here's Good Morning America on it.
This morning, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell responding to that bombshell lawsuit filed by former Miami Dolphins head coach Brian Flores. Goodell releasing a memo to all team owners, in it acknowledging efforts to promote diversity among head coaches in particular have been unacceptable, pledging to reevaluate all policies, guidelines, and initiatives relating to diversity.
There's just not enough people of color in, the executive and higher coaching level positions.
Flores' lawsuit claims, among other things, that the NFL remains rife with racism, particularly when it comes to hiring and retention of black head coaches, coordinators, and general managers. Right now, out of 32 teams, there is only one black head coach, Mike Tomlin of the Pittsburgh Steelers. There were two others, Flores with Miami and David Culley with Houston, both fired after the 2021 season. This morning, NFL Commissioner Roger Goodell responding to that bombshell lawsuit filed by former Miami Dolphins head coach Brian Flores. Goodell releasing a memo to all team owners, in it acknowledging efforts to promote diversity among head coaches in particular have been unacceptable, pledging to reevaluate all policies, guidelines, and initiatives relating to diversity.
There's just not enough people of color in, the executive and higher coaching level positions.
Flores' lawsuit claims, among other things, that the NFL remains rife with racism, particularly when it comes to hiring and retention of black head coaches, coordinators, and general managers. Right now, out of 32 teams, there is only one black head coach, Mike Tomlin of the Pittsburgh Steelers. There were two others, Flores with Miami and David Culley with Houston, both fired after the 2021 season.
All right, really embarrassing, cringeworthy embarrassment on the underrepresentation of black coaches in the league, and so many qualified candidates. And you could argue about the players as well, based on their politics, obviously, Colin Kaepernick and others, not to mention gay players and how they've handled that. All right, well, I thought this was the best point I've seen. I haven't actually paid that much attention to this issue, but I was looking through the news. I saw this, and I thought I'd include it because I think Stephen A. Smith pretty much nails what is at the root of this issue, if anything's ever going to change in stupid professional sports or professional football especially.
The other 30 owners are white. So what we really, really need to bring up is the need for black ownership. There's been plenty of black folks out there with some money that don't want to be parts of groups so they can have an ownership stake, a significant ownership stake in the National Football League. That's what we need to be addressing, because the NFL owners themselves have proven they cannot be trusted. They cannot be trusted, and they're not going to change because they don't have to, because people are going to watch football and they're going to still pour money into the NFL's coffers, and those owners are going to get paid, and that's all they care about. They cannot be trusted. Real change is going to come about when we diversify ownership.
All right, there you go, Stephen A. Smith. I think that's probably the most important point. It's almost entirely white guys. And there's one, I don't know, is there like an Arab owner or something like that? It doesn't really matter. That's the point. I think it's well made, and that's why I included. Now here is Joe Biden answering a question.
To the Americans who are currently in Ukraine, should they leave the country?
I think it'd be wise to leave the country. I'm not talking about our diplomatic corps. I'm talking about Americans who are there. I hate to see them get caught in a crossfire, if in fact they did invade. And there's no need for that. And if I had anyone there, I'd say leave.
All right. Well, yeah, it's just one day at a time. The German chancellor meeting with Joe Biden yesterday. He's probably the most important European player because of that whole natural gas pipeline. One day at a time, 1 hour at a time, as we watch closely what is happening there on the border. And now here is Jen Psaki on the same issue yesterday in the White House press briefing.
On Ukraine, Zelensky's office said yesterday that a diplomatic solution seems much more likely than war. And then we saw Jake Sullivan say yesterday that an invasion could come at any day. Can you help us square the difference here and why there still seems to be such a stark difference in assessing the threat?
Well, what our national security advisor also conveyed during some interviews with a range of your networks yesterday was that we're pursuing a two-track approach, which includes deterrence and diplomacy, but that we are ready either way for whatever decision President Putin might make. And we don't have a new assessment of his decision and where he stands on it. We also need to be prepared. Being prepared is exactly what we can do from the U.S. government. in coordination and in partnership with our NATO allies, our partners in Eastern Europe, and of course, the Ukrainians. And that is what we're focused on. So we don't actually see it as a conflict.
Jen Psaki yesterday at the White House press briefing. And now I want to play for you the First Lady. This is Jill Biden yesterday announcing basically her disappointment that the 2 years of free college did not make it into the Build Back Better bill. She was speaking at the Community College National Legislative Summit in Washington, D.C. She, of course, a longtime educator, currently working as an English professor at a Northern Virginia community college, and has for several years pushed for inclusion of 2 years of free community college for eligible students.
Joe has also had to make compromises. Congress hasn't passed the Build Back Better legislation yet. And free community college is no longer part of that package. We knew that this wasn't going to be easy. Joe always said that. Still, like you, I was disappointed because, like you, these aren't just bills or budgets to me, to you, right? We know what they mean for real people, for our students. And it was a real lesson in human nature that some people just don't get that.
Oh, yeah, Joe Biden in a fierce defense of this policy idea. And the original Build Back Better included $45 billion for states to offer 2 years of free community college tuition for a period of 5 years. But President Biden told reporters last month he was worried that would not be part of his spending plan. And remains to be seen, but as of now, obviously not in it. Now here is Adam Kinzinger, who is a Republican, and he has been forsaken by the party. He has announced he would retire, and he is on CNN yesterday sounding the alarm bells on the demise of democracy.
Got to stand up and say that truly democracy is threatened. And that's not just, some line we're going to say because it sounds cool. Oh, democracy. No, it is actually truly under threat. And we are on the verge of legitimate political civil war discussion in this country, because I used to say that we'd never get there in this country. Now I look and say we can't even talk to each other anymore. And one party believes nothing but lies. It's a concern.
Yeah, it's a concern. What the hell? How do you end on that? After all that? You kind of undersell it there at the end, Congressman Kinzinger. We're about to lose our democracy. It's a concern. I feel like saying a train is coming down the tracks, barreling at you, and you've got your shoelace tied to the tracks. Well, there's a train about to slam into me. It's a small concern. I just feel like he undersold that. Kinzinger. All right. So let's move on now to another rando clip. This is the Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg, asking the American people to please stop being assholes on the plane. Please, could you act like adults? Could you just sit there and not be an asshole? Is that too much to ask? Buttigieg.
Look, the airlines are often doing their own internal no-fly lists. Some of them have spoken about maybe coordinating on that, and we're looking at these policy recommendations as well. Not that we're waiting for that in order to take action. The FAA has a zero-tolerance policy. Fines have been increased. Enforcement has been increased. We've seen some encouraging news in terms of downward trends in unruly incidents. But let's be very clear. This is happening at an unacceptable rate. Anything besides zero is an unacceptable rate. If you are on board an aircraft, you need to be, I can't believe we even have to say this, but you need to listen to what flight crews say, and you need to act in a way that is safe, not disruptive toward flight crews and toward your fellow passengers. They always say when you're buckling up your seatbelt, you hear it on the PA system in the plane. They are there primarily for your safety, and it is a safety concern when anybody is acting up on an airplane.
When you get up and start ranting and raving like a lunatic, first of all, you're going viral. And your entire reputation and potentially your career is going to be destroyed. And that video is going to follow you around for the rest of your day. So I would start by saying you don't want to go viral for that reason. And second of all, you're an adult now. You're an adult person. So you really don't need, you're not fighting the revolution on the plane. Okay, so Now, finally, the final clip I've got for you here on today's Last 24 is of Nikki Haley. Now, this was, I'm playing this because it's the most dunked upon piece of audio or media that I saw yesterday. Here's Nikki Haley. He's on Fox News with Brett Baer. And I don't know if he pushed back after this, but the obvious, well, I'll give you some of the reaction, the folks dunking on the former governor of South Carolina. She was Donald Trump's secretary to the UN. And she has been kind of a little bit all over the map, but mostly she's always kissed the ring, and no one is more made fun of for being a sycophant and a phony than Nikki Haley at this point. It's got to be tough, but she's still out there, still doing it. Listen to this, where after Brett Baer plays a clip of Mike Pence throwing Trump under the bus, saying he was wrong about whether or not he could overturn the election, he plays that clip for her, and then she basically, well, I think you get the rest of it.
So your thoughts on that and about the focus on 2020?
Well, I think, look, Mike Pence is a good man. He's an honest man. I think he did what he thought was right on that day. But I will always say, I'm not a fan of Republicans going against Republicans, because the only ones that win when that happens are the Democrats and the media. And we have to keep our eyes on 2022. We've got to get the majority back in the House. We've got to get it in the Senate. We've got a lot of governor's races to win.
All right. Well, the reason I play that for you is to read some of the dunking that occurred on Twitter. Seth Abramson writes, Nikki Haley's spine is like the Grinch's heart on page 1. John Fugelsang wrote, but Nikki Haley's a fan of Republicans going after a Republican VP with a noose, right? That's fine. Norm Ornstein, Nikki Haley is not fit for public office. Mehdi Hassan, I'm not a fan of Republicans going after Republicans, says Nikki Haley, who checks notes, worked for Donald Trump and continues to boost him, LOL. Bill Kristol, Nikki Haley, duty, honor, country, nah, party first. Now, when you're getting dunked on by Bill Kristol, I mean, I think it's hard to recover from that. And I also feel like John Donvan, if you're listening, he's disappointed in me doing a segment called Most Dunked On Media Clip from yesterday, because it really has little merit for the public's interest. But I did it anyway because I'm cheap. It's as cheap as I go. It's as low as I go. And you can send me the most dunked on clip if you want, the most ratioed, the most dunked on, whatever you want to call it. All right. Well, that's all the audio I've got for you. Now I do have a whole bunch more headlines, lots of other very important news, which is why I bring you the news dump. Hit it, Pico.
Young Rob Urban TV show, crocodile taunting chump. He's lucky to have all his limbs for today's news dump.
Oh, yeah. Wow. Pete Coast sent me the story from the New York Post. Steve Irwin's son, Chase, nearly attacked by a 12-foot crocodile. Of course, his dad was killed by a stingray, and now he almost got eaten by a crocodile, which would be a real tough thing for that family and the country of Australia. No offense, Campbell. All right. Well, what have I for you today? I think this is a really important story, probably the most undercovered story. The Justice Department signaling folks it may allow safe injection sites, which would be a major policy victory for cities and areas all over the country, I should say, to create a safe operating place to take what are considered still illegal drugs. And this is something advocates have hailed as a way to curb the scourge of overdose deaths, drawn from the latest available death certificate. CDC says more than 100,000 Americans died of overdoses from May 2020 to April 2021. And this is definitely something I'm going to guest up on and talk about it from a policy and legal standpoint. And really, really big deal. I mentioned, of course, New Jersey is lifting their mask mandate. California, I should have mentioned, I didn't have the audio, but California to end mask mandate for the vaccinated next week. The governor there expected to announce that. A company called Rumble, it's a social media platform, never heard of it until I found out that they offered Joe Rogan $100 million to bring his podcast over there amid the controversy surrounding the show on Spotify. Apparently, the CEO wrote an open letter that says that his company stands with Joe Rogan, who's facing blowback for, well, everything, and that he'd love to give him 100 million reasons to make the world a better place over on Rumble. Isn't Rumble a gay men's app where you meet in the woods? And no? That's not what... Okay. All right. Sorry. The top White House scientist has resigned after a review found that he demeaned his staff. Science advisor Eric Lander apologized for mistreating subordinates. The White House struggled Monday to explain why he wasn't departing, and then in the evening, he quit. So there he goes. And that's good. I think that's probably a good thing. I don't know much about that story, but it's certainly better than the last administration where they would give you a promotion if you were a dick. And they would give you an even bigger promotion if you took out your dick. All right, so well, listen, I'm just here to tell you the truth. And a guy who does not seem like a dick or that he would ever take his out, and I don't really know that much about him, but is rocker and legend Neil Young, who is now urging Spotify workers to quit their jobs. He said in a blog post or an essay that he wrote and posted on his website, get out of that place before it eats up your soul. So 2 weeks after he demanded the company remove either podcaster Joe Rogan or his music, now he is basically writing this. 76-year-old attacked misinformation, some of the country's biggest banks, and appealed to Spotify employees to quit en masse in this lengthy letter that he posted on his website. Also cited the climate chaos and asked his fans to boycott Chase, City and Bank of America, as well as Wells Fargo. So you go, Neil Young. All right, what else have I got for you? How about this one? The U.S. Air Force has been ordered to pay more than $230 million in damages to survivors and victims' families for a deadly shooting at a Texas church. And why is it? Because they failed to flag a conviction that might have kept the gunman from legally buying the weapon used in the shooting, according to a federal judge in San Antonio Monday. More than 24 people were killed, of course, including 8 children, when this guy, I won't say his name, opened fire during a Sunday service at First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs. He then died of a apparently self-inflicted gunshot wound after being shot and chased by 2 men who heard the gunfire at the church and had served in the Air Force. He'd served in the Air Force before the attack. Wow, $230 million the Air Force is going to have to pay for, or the cost of one F-35. So, terrible tragedy, of course, there in Texas, but their family might be able to get some serious compensation in this case. And finally, apparently, Kim Kardashian and Kanye West are feuding over their daughter's TikTok videos. They're feuding publicly, and I'm only telling you that because my daughter told me that at dinner, and now you have to know, because I don't want to have this information just locked up in my brain, and now it's over. And so is the news dump. All right, folks. Well, thank you very much for joining me today. As always, I can't thank you enough ever for your support in terms of a subscription. So if you haven't signed up, standupwithpete.com is the place to go, or patreon.com/Pete Dominic. You can do that as well. Sign up for as little as $5, edit your subscription upward, and I am looking for someone to help me with video. I've been talking to a couple people, listeners, but I'd love to get a listener or the son or daughter of a listener who's into graphic design or animation or video, YouTube, that might want to work on my channel and my video stuff. So if that's you or someone you know, send them my way. Email standupwithpete@gmail.com. You can DM me on Twitter, whatever works. All right, so now it's time to get to the guests. I've got 3 guests joining me on today's show. How about that? Usually 2, but today a bonus guest, because late last night I called up Carlo Sgro, who's up in Canada, longtime listener, and asked him about what was going on with this trucker protest. We had a good conversation about that. Before that, though, I have a guy named Heath Druzin, who is a journalist who has covered wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now he's hosting a new podcast about the wars here at home, about extremists. It's called Extremely American, and I think you're going to love that as well. And then now I've got the great JL Cauvin. JL, of course, is a regular here on Stand Up. Always love our conversations. You can check him out at jlcauvin.com. He's got 2 podcasts. Righteous Prick drops every Tuesday. Making Podcasts Great Again every Wednesday. A whole bunch of listeners went out and have seen him at some of his most recent dates across the country, from Chicago to California. And this weekend, or this Thursday, he is going to be in Utah, folks. He will be Thursday, the 10th, 7 p.m., Wise Guys in Jordan Landing, Utah. Check check that date out. I think that's the last date he's got on the tour. Of course, subscribe to him on YouTube as well as everywhere else. You can hire him for a cameo. We talked about the tour, how that's going. Always a thoughtful conversation between two good friends. Also got him to weigh in on all the stuff regarding Joe Rogan and censorship and comedians and podcasts. And he reminds me that, of course, the great Gareth Sever wrote a jingle for him. And I had forgotten to play it. I keep doing that. I'm so bad. But I did play it a few minutes in. He reminds me, and it's pretty hilarious. You're going to love it. Thank you, Gareth. Here it is. There's my guy.
Hello. Sorry for my tardiness. I was finishing up my podcast, and now it's fucking go time. Let me tell you something. Some strong stand-up with Pete representation in California. And I loved it. Desiree, who's obviously one of your hangouts. Yep. She shows up to the hangouts. She was like, I'm bringing like a group of moms with me. And it's so fun in LA. Like in another city to be like, oh, yay, moms. But then all the guys I was working with last night, I was like, a table of like super hot chicks just walked in. I go, knowing me, it's the moms group. Yeah. And it was a group of hot moms.
So Desiree, I'm recording this. Let's just do it.
No, I know. I think she found that. I mean, I called them the hot moms to their face.
Oh, yeah.
While they were taking pictures with me.
I did the same thing because Desiree and several other people, or at least I'm trying to think who else. Ronnie Gonzalez, they sent me pictures of you after your show, which was really wonderful. It made me so happy. Yeah. And it's just, I mean, it's always fun to see you in a picture with anybody because you're a monster. But so Desiree sends me that picture with her and like, 4 or 5 women. And I'm like, I'm looking at them all. I'm like, are you kidding me?
And the picture, I don't think the picture does justice, just to be fair. Like, and I'm like, okay, well, next swing around, let's do Desiree's divorced mom friends.
Yeah, seriously.
How about that? We'll be
I
more
reached out to her after, and I asked her. Obviously, I'll tell her to listen to this. And I said, "Hey, do you have any ugly friends?" And she said, "No." So I guess, what are you gonna do?
Yeah, no, it's a burden she must carry. But it was, I mean. The shows have been really good. Like I know this, I say this kind of shit, but I'm clicking so fucking hard. Yeah. Well, you're doing these consistent gigs, and you're also living the road life on a train, which is bizarre. We'll get into that, but the point is, you're like thinking about your act probably a lot, and you're doing your act a lot, and that's all you or really anybody needs to get that rhythm going when you got it going. You must. I've been thinking about you a ton. I've been following you, and I've been thinking just what you're saying. I'm like, there's no way he's not in a rhythm. He's got to be loving it, and just hoping that the shows have been well enough attended or really well attended to the point where maybe you'd been surprised, because that nothing would make me happier if you were happy. I wouldn't say I've been surprised, but I've been satisfied.
Great.
They're not huge crowds. Obviously, I'm picking from the left of the center group, so there's more hesitancy on going out, unfortunately.
Oh, that's a great point. Yes, you're going to, if you appeal to people who are more, let's just be really generous, very not concerned about others or themselves.
If your audience is sociopaths and daddy issues, they will come to your show during any weather. But the crowds have been very good. And last night, I'm going to get that tape from the club. Last night was arguably better than my special taping, which was a fucking great thing.
I was there for that. That was a great thing. Unfortunately, I had to watch it from backstage. I'll never, ever get over that.
Well, and what's fun about that is, as I tell people, just a quick plug for my 2 podcasts, Making Podcasts Great Again and Righteous PK podcast. There are 2 episodes. The last 2 episodes, both short, but explain what happened with my special. Can I give you the story real quick?
Yeah.
So the person who is going to pitch it to some streaming platforms on a long shot, but still going to make an honest effort to see if we could get it sold, he gave me sort of we'll try. No guarantees. It's probably unlikely, but we're going to make the effort. Then he watched it. He actually watched the special and came to a more bold conclusion of, I think we actually can sell this. So once he saw the product, his optimism for selling it
increased. But there is a technical error with the main camera of the one shoot we did for the special. So it seems like I get into it on my podcast, but the bottom line is this probably won't sell. I will have to either reshoot it, or so it's a classic dilemma of in the same stroke you found out that in fact this is a masterpiece and we can't sell it. So I feel like that's very on brand for my career. But anyway, before you get life coachy, let's just move on from that. But last night's set was
life coach E is funny.
Last night's set.
All right. How often do you employ? Hold on.
Beast.
Before you tell me about last night's set.
First time
how
ever.
often are you like, you know what? You're getting a little life coachy.
First time.
Oh,
wait. Am I going to get to hear my jingle on this episode?
Oh.
No,
yes.
I don't want to hear it now. I can hear it when
redo it. Well, I'm going to edit it so we do it at the top.
Oh, okay, but I'm willing to just... Oh,
I forgot all about
it. I'm willing to hear it like an audience member, like a high-level Patreon supporting audience member.
What do you mean, willing to hear it somewhere at a different time?
No, like I can listen tomorrow and just go, oh, I'm hearing it like everybody else hears it. But you want my real-time reaction?
J.L. Cauvin, one substantially large man. This aging reformed lawyer now slinging jokes to adoring fans. He'll kick ass on your cameo for just under $1,000. If you hit him at a live show, you're damn right, he'll take a stand. You better believe he's at the absolute top of his game. Just ask him, he'll tell you the same. No one's got a better impression of he who shall not be named. He's only after fortune, relevance, and fame. Let's go, Cauvin. Let's go, Cauvin. Let's go, Cauvin.
I'm aroused now.
Well, that's awkward because that's Gareth Sever's daughter.
Well, how old is she?
Let's call her 18.
I want to know if I'm criminally awkward or just awkward.
Let's just say she's 20. I think she's 6. What do you think, Gareth Sever? What do you have to say about that?
That's amazing. What's brilliant about that is you set me up because I literally basically committed multiple offenses during this interview before hearing that song. Like when he said he'll tell you the same, that's literally what I was just doing.
That guy is really, really brilliant and talented. He comes up with them at the hangouts sometimes about a situation that occurred at a hangout. And then 20 minutes later, he's like, hey man, I just wrote a jingle about what just happened.
Well, I mean, to me, the Ophira Finnegan one is so genius. It's so cool, like funny and whimsical, but also genius. Like just where he's mixing their names together. I love that. That's So thank you very much. That was that felt like the most beautiful roast of me. Yeah. Right? Like too funny and fun to be offended. But it definitely hit really on the money in several points.
It's great how he's able to pick people apart and represent them in several different ways, in both complimentary and a little bit of, having taken the piss out.
Hell yeah. So just to be clear, let me say again, I am at the top of my game right now and really crushed last night.
It's so great. So last night you were in Burbank, California is what it looks like. And I just retweeted Richard Marks.
Yeah.
Basically tweeting a review of your show and how much he enjoyed it, along with a photo of you on stage. My retweet of you, I retweeted his compliment because you're my son, and I'm so proud of my boy that he's impressed. Richard Marks in this case, and so many other famous people. So I retweet Richard Marks quote, talking about your and Bradley Whitford just retweeted me. Retweeting Mark. So now you got the Whitford, a third blue check.
Bradley Whitford, I thought got mad at me like a week ago.
Well, now you know. Well, I don't know what you're talking about, but clearly, maybe that's his way of saying I'm not mad at you.
Oh, but can I tell you what happened?
Yeah.
It was kind of interesting because Bradley Whitford has been, in my DMs, and I did a cameo for his wife. He was like, make it dirty. It was like hilarious. And he's been nothing but Richard Marx has been my number. Like, I hugged him last night and said, I know this is very weird, but I was a huge fan of yours as an artist. I really was. And you have been so consistently supportive and sharing and helping. You are one of those accounts early in my quote unquote rise that really was amplifying my stuff. And it was really amazing. But Bradley Whitford was also one of the guys who was really
hold on. What did Richard Marx say? Was his wife Daisy Fuentes there?
Yeah, she was very impressed. I could hear them laughing throughout the show. Oh. I fucked that crowd up. I was like a monster last night. It was so good.
I wish you were here. I'd tussle your hair.
Thank you.
I'd give you a little. I'd grab your neck, you scruff your neck. So wait, what did Richard Marx say when you?
He was just like, dude, that was amazing. You killed it. Like, he was supposed to be in Jersey for a gig in 2 weeks that I had tickets to. So I was going to be like, hey, but he had to postpone them till the fall.
He came to your show instead of you going to his. That's just so wonderful.
Yeah, but it was
okay. So Bradley Whitford.
Honestly, I don't even remember what he was. I remember our conversation, but it was like still kind of a surreal moment because it's this combination of I'm a huge fan, and the only thing I'm certain of is that I was so good that I don't have to be like, thanks for coming to my show, sir.
Sure.
Like, no, you just got a monster comedy performance that anybody could be proud of.
Sure, I heard it was good.
Yeah, it was great. Please play my song again. But and I got like a nice extended November Rain length song, so that was pretty cool also.
J.L. Cauvin, one substantially large man.
So tell me about what Bradley Whitford said.
So Bradley Whitford went to Wesleyan, which is in like a rival.
In case anybody who doesn't know Bradley Whitford is, of course, he's
multiple-time Emmy-winning actor from he was in Get Out, The West Wing, Handmaid's Tale. Excellent actor.
West Wing is what he's most famous for. But yeah, great guy, hilarious. I interviewed him several times. He's like so good in an interview. Funny as hell. Go ahead.
Here, Aspen Ideas Festival reference coming soon.
Lawyer now slinging jokes to adoring fans.
So go ahead.
So I've probably in our 2 years of interacting made like 2 or 3 Williams Wesleyan references. I'm not Mr. College rah bro guy. Just like I've only made 1 or 2 references to Paul Rykoff about Amherst sucking. Like I don't do it. It's like right. I've made like 1 or 2.
That's funny. You find out people's alma maters and then you use it.
No, but Paul Rykoff shares Amherst.
Oh, and then you respond with a dig.
But like twice maybe.
Okay,
ever.
no, that's fun. I think that's fun. Right. I'm sure everybody appreciates that.
So Bradley Whitford shared a picture from his movie Tick, Tick, Boom, which is on Netflix and sort of an Oscar contender.
Oh.
And Lin-Manuel Miranda, who directed it, also went to Wesleyan. So he shared a photo, Lin-Manuel Miranda, that said Andrew Garfield, but it was like Jonathan Larson and Stephen Sondheim last day of rehearsal. Now, Jonathan Larson is played by Andrew Garfield in the lead. Stephen Sondheim, a legendary, recently deceased Broadway person, went to Williams, and Bradley Whitford is played him in the movie. So I wrote underneath Bradley Whitford's retweet of that, a Wesleyan guy playing a Williams legend, ? And I said, really like the movie. And he replied, give it a rest, Cauvin, Jesus Christ. And I wrote ha after, and after like 2 hours, there was no acknowledgement of the ha. So I immediately became like an insecure teenage girl on social media.
I mean, that's bone crushing.
I was like, delete, never said that. I even deleted my original tweet. And then I still saw a day later people liking his reply, even though they had no idea what I had said anymore.
Man.
They were just like, well, I like that Bradley Whitford took a shit on this guy. So it was, but hopefully we're okay now.
Oh, man. Well, he just retweeted my retweet of Richard Marx's review of your show. So I think you guys are good. but maybe he's like, maybe he's in a little cranky mood, and maybe, you're being the, always on guy or something on Twitter, he thinks, or something. Do you comment on
well, hopefully, has he seen my new fitness photo? Because I don't think he's going to, you're going to ease up with those Twitter aggression, bro.
I saw it, and I was really impressed. Your shoulders look, seriously, legitimately, your arms, you're wearing a sleeveless, you look really like ripped and great, and you've lost so much weight, and you've been consistently in the gym, and yet you still tweet out some of your most unhealthy meals, which is, it gives the viewer some confusion. But what are we doing? He's looking good.
I'm letting them know that I'm a man of the people. Like, I'm allowed a Cheesecake Factory meal to treat myself after destroying Los Angeles on stage.
Gas on your Cameo for just under $1,000. If you heckle him at a live show, you're damn right, he'll take a stand.
So I want to talk with you about one other aspect of this trip. Remind people that you're doing several dates, and what do you got coming up here? And then tell us about why you're doing it by train, because someone asked you.
Mm-hmm.
And you're taking buses, and you're really slumming it and documenting it. And a lot of comedians wouldn't do that. They would mislead, and you're really being very transparent about the way you're traveling, as opposed to flying. At first, I just assumed that you were afraid to fly, but I'm pretty sure you're not. I'm pretty sure you fly.
No, I dislike flying. Let me be clear about that.
Is that because you're a giant?
No, I don't like flying. I'm uncomfortable with it, but it's been a few years
because
since
you're a coward.
Yeah. It's been a few years since I was in a plane. Like, obviously, when gigs are coming in steady and you're like, I'm flying here this week, next week I'm flying here, you just get accustomed to it. So even if you don't like it, you're like, this is part of the job. It's now my system. My nerves are like adjusted. But I haven't been in a plane since 2018. Obviously, 2020, 2021, there were good reasons why I wasn't traveling. But I don't like the idea of flying with I know this may sound stupid, but and maybe it's just an excuse, but like flying with a mask on, like cross country, and also with the threat, as remote as it may be, of people like fighting in the air, it makes me very anxious.
Come on. I mean, that's less likely. I'm just telling you. I know it's not. I know, but you're being unreasonable and irrational. That's not likely to happen.
Yes, but so is a fear of flying.
Yes.
That in and of itself is an irrational fear.
Meanwhile, you're on a Greyhound where you're much more likely to get some kind of an injury.
Oh, no, I got sodomized by 3 ex-cons leaving San Jose this week.
And yet you never, ever even considered that.
And they wouldn't even follow me on Twitter afterwards. No, there really were 3 just released convicts behind me on my bus from San Jose back to LA.
And they're probably the least likely or most likely if they're like Brooks. Right, who couldn't take being outside?
Oh, they weren't Brooks. They felt more like the mothers or the queens. The gang.
Oh, I don't know what that is. No.
Did you see Shawshank?
Yeah. Oh, the gay guys or the guys the prison.
Well, I don't know that they identified as gay.
Right,
I don't
you're right.
know if you can put them in that box.
Right. They
were more pansexual.
Right. That's what you felt. That's the vibe they were giving off more. Either way, they're not likely to commit a crime when they just got out, I'm guessing.
Right, but one guy did say the words, I don't steal, I kill. And I thought, oh, okay, good note, good thing. So you're telling me my bags are safe at the rest stop. Thank you. I'll just be sure not to cross paths with you while you're urinating or calling your girlfriend.
Don't you also feel, honest to God, I mean, I'm being totally serious, generally, if someone's going to commit a violent crime, they're going to go for probably someone who's an easiest target. And I'm guessing they look at you and they think you're Jack Reacher. So why not move on to the old lady?
But what if they are going on what if they haven't gotten out of that prison mentality and they're like, the first thing you do when you get on a Greyhound bus is you pick out the biggest comic you can find and you fuck them up.
Good point.
And the reason also, the buses is not a big deal. That's how because for like short trips, I'm not getting on a plane to go an hour flight if I can go somewhere in 4 hours on a bus. Like, I don't like going, I never take like tiny short flights ever, comfortable with flying or not. But I also did want to travel the country by train. And this was an opportunity. I have been, as I've probably told you many times, like anxious like I've never felt before over the last couple of years. I've been overworked. I've been stressed. And going cross country by train, which is not cheap. Like I have my own little room on the train, is forced peace. It's scenery. I have lots of video and photos across the country, very nice photos. And it's reading and it's looking out the window and it's like forced tranquility. Like there's nothing else for me to do except look at the scenery, read a book, watch a movie, have a drink while like looking out the window. It's not something I can make the habit of my comedy career, but this was the time where I was like, yeah, I'm going to take like a cross country trip and just see, like, just force myself to be like, half of this trip, I don't even have cell phone access. So,
and are you still working?
I worked a couple of days, but I used a decent chunk of vacation to do this because
good.
You know,
so it sounds lovely for several reasons. Where it sounds very healthy. It sounds very healthy. Although it seems, I don't know. Do you miss your girlfriend or your dog or?
Very much. Yeah. Especially when, the only hot chicks coming to my shows are fucking married.
Right. Right.
But no shade desert. No, I'm kidding. The divorce, there were like 5 of them. So at least 2 of them will be divorced by my next swing through the West Coast.
Yeah, that's
come on. Yeah.
Positive.
So that's silver lining. But no, my girlfriend is meeting me in Vegas on Tuesday. And then we're going to drive up to Utah on Wednesday. No, and that's nice. But I miss my dog very much. And my dog, I think, has had me by her side basically for 2 years as I've been working from home. Like my girlfriend doesn't work from home. So my dog, like,
that's
recently,
hard.
like, pissed in the elevator. And I think it's like, I joked on my podcast where I was like, it's kind of cute when you find out like your dog is like terribly distressed without you. And you're like, but that's a high price. Like, it's like, I'd rather her be okay, but it's like, there's always that silver lining. Like, oh, when my dog is worried, she looks so cute, but she is worried.
And you also shit in a stairwell in your hotel last night. So,
well, that's what you do when you really crush a set in LA. You got to cultivate that rock star rep.
Especially in the hotel.
I have a couple of bits on the set I did last night, and I've already kind of perfected one. And I only started telling it like 2 weeks ago, but it's about Samuel Little, the black serial killer who recently died. He killed 93 people in California, but most of them were, black prostitutes and like runaways. So there's a lot of obviously racism baked into how this guy managed to be like 3 times the killer that Ted Bundy is. But the whole joke is about, the racism among streaming platforms for not giving him his own special or docuseries. Last night was one of the greatest. Last night was like a top 5, if not higher, night for me in comedy.
That's amazing. Is there not a recording?
Oh, I have it. I have to email the club just to have them send me the.
I can't wait. I really want to hear it. So let me ask you, because I have to go in like 14 minutes.
Perfect.
And I want to ask you about the Joe Rogan thing. It's initially, I've been wanting to reach out to you because I thought it would make for a great conversation to hear about your journey.
Sure.
And especially because I know a lot of listeners came out, and that's amazing. But I definitely wanted to get, as many comedians as I could talk to who were thoughtful, like you are, of course, about a wide range of things, but especially about Joe Rogan. You've been obviously honest. You understand comedy, law, and podcasting all really well. You get it all really well. And what are your thoughts on how Spotify has handled this whole thing? First of all,
well, they're doing what? They're giving like millions to the United Negro College Fund or something.
They said something like they would give $100 million donation. The CEO said to some kind of different organizations that would create. I don't know, but
right. It's. I think. It's hard for me to speak on this because my thought on Joe Rogan from the beginning has been like, okay, he's very popular. He is an honest. It seems like he's an honest person. He is, I think whatever you're getting, that's his honest product. I don't think he's a pandering person. I think he, you know what I mean? I think.
Well, can I just throw one thing in there? I got one point to make, and then I'll let you say everything else because I've really been wanting to bounce this off somebody. Joe Rogan I don't know if you've seen this clip, but at the beginning of the pandemic, he had two guests on, and he'd had one of them previous times. I'm sure you're probably familiar with both of them. They're pretty well known now, Peter Hotez and Michael Osterholm. And have you seen this clip with Rogan talking about how, important vaccines are and these crazy people? Yeah. Oh,
wow.
The point is, it's understandable.
So it seems like he might be pandering. Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, what I'm
saying
he's
shifted?
All I can say to you is from my experience doing the same thing he's doing for 15 years, almost the same thing. If I have a guest come on and say a thing, I'm not saying there aren't exceptions, but then somebody else comes on later and says something completely opposite. I don't delete what the other person said. I try to square them. The point being, if you're as big as Joe Rogan is, hell, if you're as big as I am, you can get most people on, certainly epidemiologists, certainly scientists and doctors. You can get the best people on.
Right.
And you have access to that. You don't have, I don't think it's okay to be ignorant and denial when you have access to the most credible, respectable experts when it comes, in this case, to science. And he's had them on. And now he's gone down the road of crazy. And Peter Hotez has personally told me and tweeted about it. I've tried to tell Joe, please have him back on so I can push back on some of what he's saying. That's the least he could do. The least he could do.
Okay. Well, no, that does change my calculation that it's whether it's conscious or unconscious. Then I think this is what I felt like I saw to a certain extent with Adam Carolla, who I used to be a regular guest on with. I always knew he was a right of center guy. I didn't really agree with a lot of what he said politically, but it usually comprised 10% of the show. I thought he was hilarious. I still think he's a very funny man and was always nice to me. But I think sometimes, whether it's consciously or unconsciously, if your dollars and your engagement start to skew in a certain direction, it's almost like how plants will tilt towards the sun. They're not necessarily doing it consciously, but you just start to like the engagement more as you start to create a feedback loop where it's like, hey, when I have these guests on, we get more cool engagement that I like. When I do this, when I say this, and it may not be the cynical Tucker Carlson, I'm vaccinated, but I am going to directly lean into spreading bullshit. Right. That's it may be an unconscious or semi-conscious leaning, like, where you just go, yeah, I'm enjoying the way the show's working when we skew in these more obscure or controversial directions.
But do you not think I think there should be responsibility when you get to a certain level to have some kind of editor, producer, fact checker that can say, listen, you're reaching millions of people. We have to make sure that you don't say.
Well, would you say podcasting is maybe in a smaller way, but significant? Another kind of like some of the big tech companies like Facebook were at, where it's like we got bigger faster without having to adhere to. In other words, podcasts and social media have become public utilities and kind of media companies that don't adhere to the same standards that those other things do.
I only think that that's not really congruent, because when you're talking about social media, you're talking about all kinds of impossible things to chart and to prevent if you're giving them the benefit of the doubt in terms of algorithms and different posts, and somebody posts this and you got to find it. Right? No, if you get to a certain level as a podcaster, you're on a platform. It's not that much different or radically different than radio and TV. Someone listens to the podcast and says, we shouldn't put this out. It's factually incorrect. We're a giant company. We're reaching millions of people. There should be a level of responsibility the company employs people to do.
But when you're in an era where Fox News hosts can go to court or to have depositions where they say, I'm actually not a news program, I'm an opinion program. If that's an actual cable news channel that can do that, a podcaster who has no incentive to become more righteous and disciplined won't.
It's the difference is, at least at Fox News, there are editors and producers and executives that will go down with that ship because they are seeing what's going on. They're giving him such free rein, and there's nobody that is going to censor him at all. And by the way, this argument that we or anybody's trying to silence him, no. We're trying to get out accurate information when it comes to something like as dangerous as vaccination or or any other number of things. It's not Joe Rogan can say anything he wants. And let's get to that then. The N-word stuff. How do you feel about that?
Well, to your first point, I think the N-word stuff is a little bit in opposition of your idea that nobody's trying to silence him. I'm not saying they're not right, but I think this is an offshoot of, so they're not going to cancel him or fire him over vaccinations. Well, now we're going to keep finding things. I think.
No, you just keep finding things and you say, don't say the N-word and don't do that. Do whatever else you want to do. Our standard is no N-word. They have that in the description of their.
And don't you think, I listened to his apology and I think it was relatively fair and whole in terms of I said things in context. I think he's not going to say it again. I don't think. But I don't know, because there is a weird relationship that it seems people like Rogan and his ilk have with the N-word. They sort of want to neuter it, but also want the clout of saying it at the same time. They want it to not have power, but they also kind of, I think, secretly like saying it. Look, I'm the one who's neutering the N-word by my clinical usage of it. But I think there's something to be said. I know this is, what was it? 20 references in 12 years that were stitched together. No, he shouldn't say it. Saying the N-word is perfectly acceptable. There's this academic argument of and I just read John Thompson's autobiography, the late coach of Georgetown basketball. Yeah. And he made a similar argument as a major sort of black figure in sports history. He hates the N-word. He said in his book, he hates when people say the N-word. He's just say it.
Oh, okay.
Because you're just making me think of it, which is also, I think, an argument Louis C.K. made. But that's just one man's opinion. I don't know. Yes, I just think,
does he
what are we
hate it?
doing?
Does he get to? I'm going to go ahead and decide that if either it's a no-win, so I'm going to go with annoying the person who doesn't like the N-word than annoying the person, all the people who will be so triggered in such a different.
Oh, no. And I don't mean to, I'm working it out intellectually.
No, I appreciate the perspective. I'm just saying.
I think he should just, I think this idea of somehow saying the N-word as a phrase is some sort of intellectually dishonest thing is ridiculous to me. You can say. I don't like saying that. I've said it in my life. I've read it. I've used it in telling a story. I don't use it sort of in comedy. I used it on one album once when I was a newer comic as a punchline for a bit about someone not knowing I was half black. But it was, I think it's starting. I think that the people who don't think he should say it are correct. I think his apology, in my opinion, came off as mostly seemed sincere, gave it some context that, as he said, I wasn't calling anybody that.
Yeah.
And I wasn't flippantly using it I'm allowed to just use it casually. I think that makes a big difference whether somebody can move on.
I think but by the way, I'm far less concerned about his usage of the word N-word than his actions and the fact that he really doesn't book a lot of black people or people of color. And when he talks about the issues, he talks about it with the few people of color who are in the minority. That's where the anti-racism comes in. You have the biggest platform in the world and you're not interviewing all these amazing, super thoughtful, brilliant black women or men about the issues that we're talking about. And that's what really has always bothered me and certainly a lot of other comics and people of color. Hey, where are, more guests that are way different or trans people or whatever? He's always talking about people without them in the conversation. I think that's the bigger problem.
You remember you said you got a lot of shit when you went on his program.
Oh, it was the worst, second worst.
Right.
Second worst to pedophile gate.
And I think one of those, the issue there is, now imagine you're somebody going there, an outspoken person. I mean, I'm sure there'd be plenty of people willing to go on, and he might not attack them. And this is what I sort of felt with Carolla, on a smaller scale. it's not even that Joe Rogan would be the problem if you went on his show. Did Joe Rogan tweet any insults at you after appearing on his show?
No, Joe and I are cool. And I really
that's what I'm saying.
Appreciate him having me on the show, obviously.
That's my point. The fan bases, though, and I remember my last couple times on Corolla, Adam was happy to have me on, and then his fans had just continuously skewed in this other direction, and some of that had been cultivated. Some of that becomes the more you have Milo Yiannopoulos, Ben Shapiro, Dennis Prager on, and the less time you have for other people you might disagree with. And the show made this slow but steady march away from a balance to a sort of, I'll have a couple of comics on and a lot of provocateurs, and Tucker Carlson is now my friend. And you're going to cultivate an environment where the more you do that, the more good comments you get back, supportive comments you get. And so it becomes its own self-sustaining ecosystem, unless, as I think you're suggesting to somebody like Joe Rogan, unless you are cognizant and aware and making an effort not to fall easily into the comfort of, my fans love this shit, let's just keep feeding it to them.
The idea, this idea, well, let me ask you one more kind of, I wanted to get your answer on one more specific thing about this, which is the, secondary or tertiary or whatever the word for fourth is, a conversation outgrowth of this, which is, did you see the Whitney Cummings tweet that got a lot of attention about what a comedian's job is?
Yeah.
I really hope we don't have to argue about this, and I have 2 minutes left. But when someone describes what a comedian's job is, I'm bored by any words other than to be funny.
Yeah, I saw that. Did you see Mark Maron replied, like, you should add funny to the list of things?
No, comedians did not sign up. Here's Whitney Cummings. Comedians did not sign up to be your hero. It's our job to be irreverent and dangerous, to question authority and take you through a spooky, mental, haunted house so you can arrive at your own conclusions. Stay focused on the people we pay taxes to be moral leaders. And I just wrote, I couldn't disagree with my old friend Whitney more here. It's a comedian's job to be funny. Full stop.
Right.
We can all talk about the comedians we like and those who do speak truth to power and do political and social commentary, or you can talk about Brian Regan, Jim Gaffigan, and Jerry Seinfeld, who are all brilliant observational comedians.
Can I tell you
and a third of George Carlin's material, which was also observational.
Right. My thing with this is, see, it's a slippery slope because we've allowed comedy, even when not controversial, to be sort of now lecture-y. And that you get a pass if you're being provocative, even if you're not being funny. And I'm thinking of Dave Chappelle in particular, one of the greatest comedians of all time. And he has veered more into this kind of, I'm sharing ideas and I'm being some sort of like pop culture thought leader now. And it's like, but it's not funny. Even if people agree with you, like how people go, it's, it's not hilarious, a lot of the stuff he's saying. And there's better people. If I want to hear a lecture on LGBTQ issues, my first source is not going to be Dave Chappelle.
Right.
He'll be the first one I want for jokes. He'll be one of the first people I go to if I'm going to hear jokes about certain issues. But I think there is this, comedians seem to want it both ways. And I agree. Just to be clear, funny. And a lot of the people who would agree and retweet Whitney Cummings' comment because they're perceiving it as a defense of Rogan or someone else, they'll be the same people who are probably shitting on Hannah Gadsby's special for not being funny enough, even though it was a talked about provocative special. They would be in the same breath. I'm the one who complains about anything that's not funny in comedy, whether it's one of my heroes or somebody I just discovered. If it's not that funny, that's the only time I go, comedy should be funny.
Yeah.
And I think you have a real double standard now where this truth-telling warrior pose, when it defends your guy or girl, that's the stance you take.
Yeah.
But it's like funny. I made it, I talk about this with sitcoms all the time. Like when Transparent, I think, won Best Comedy at the Emmys, it was like, it's not that funny. It's just a half hour. It was good, but it wasn't funny. And I think we've veered into all sorts of things, like TV comedies that are feel good, but not necessarily hilarious, now win Best Comedy. Comedians, because they've been comedians, spouting their own beliefs in unfunny lectures, somehow still gets to be comedy, especially if it's offending. if Dave Chappelle wasn't offending anybody and saying serious things, it wouldn't be comedy. But somehow part of the comedy world is like, well, if he's either being funny or irreverent, they both count as comedy. But it's like, no. If you're irreverent, for it to count as comedy, it must also be funny. You don't get to split those like Netflix discs and streaming. They've got to be combined. Like if you're irreverent, it only counts as comedy if it's funny. So.
Well, I've just been given a story that I just wanted you to comment on. I really appreciate that everything that you just said. I don't want to dismiss
Desiree's friends have gotten divorced en masse.
No, it's...
okay, well, I don't know. It's breaking news. I had a great show last night. It wouldn't surprise me if a couple of them rethought that. Anyway, what?
Remember Steve Irwin?
The crocodile or crocodile hunter? Or
yeah.
Stingray enthusiast?
His son was chased and nearly attacked by a 12-foot crocodile, and there's video of it. And I just wonder if you have any thoughts on this developing story.
He was almost crocodile done.
Yep. Imagine if your dad died, an animal killed your dad and you. I mean, like maybe you should get out of the business just to prevent against it.
That's why I don't live in a nursing home.
Why?
Because my dad passed away in a nursing home.
Right. That's what I thought. I wasn't sure, and I wanted to fact check it. God rest his soul. Because
good job, anti-Joe Rogan.
Thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. Jordan Landing, Utah, this Thursday, 7 p.m.
Be there, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
There you go, JL Cauvin. See him this week in Utah. If you're out there, see him, listen to his podcasts, subscribe on YouTube, follow him on Twitter, all of it, and check it all out, jlcauvin.com. All right, now we got a first-timer joining me for the first time. Yeah, that's what a first-timer is, right, Pete? Well done. Who writes this shit? He is the host. He's a journalist who has covered the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq for Stars and Stripes, and now he is hosting a podcast called Extremely American, which takes you inside militias and other far-right groups that are trying to remake America and their absolutist image. These groups are quietly growing larger, influencing elections across the country from school boards to the U.S. Congress. And Heath Druzin traveled the country to meet with these groups and the people pushing back on them as well. Extremely American, available everywhere you get podcasts. Heath is on Twitter at @HDruzin, Druzin. And we talked a couple days ago. I think you're going to like it. Here we go. All right, I've just told you all about him and his excellent new podcast. Heath Druzin is joining me, and I'm very excited to have you. Congrats on the podcast. Really important work. Welcome to our show, Stand Up.
Thanks. Great to be here.
So, first question is, who are you to host this podcast with this content? What kind of a reporter, a white man even, I guess, decides to report on and get to know the folks that you have to get to know to do what you're doing with this podcast? Why are you doing this? What's your interest and background?
Well, my background actually, even well before this podcast, might not seem related, but kind of is. I actually used to be a war reporter. I worked for a newspaper called Stars and Stripes in Iraq and Afghanistan for a while. So I covered a very different kind of extremism over there. I've kind of always been interested in the extremes. And then when I came back to the States, I actually moved to Idaho, and I've actually lived there on and off for quite a while. And I worked for a project called Guns in America, looking at the role of guns in American life. And I'm not sure there's a movement where guns are more foundational than the militia movement. And Idaho is kind of a stronghold for them. So I got really interested in that through my coverage. And I think what made me more interested is I started seeing a lot of these militias kind of move from training into the mountains to being a real presence in the state capitol buildings, where they wanted to really start to affect politics. And I thought, I think that makes them a lot more important. It's one thing if guys are training for some theoretical conflict out in the woods, shaking their fist at the government. But if they're actually trying to change government and actually doing it in some cases, then that's probably something as a reporter I need to pay more attention to.
Your conflict reporting, war
coverage in Iraq and Afghanistan was for a major outlet, Stars and Stripes, and so you had good resources for that, and obviously you're an experienced guy. What are some of the stories, and if you want to lead into how it compares to the movement that you're covering here in America, the parallels? Tell me a little bit about your reporting back there in Iraq and Afghanistan, and real quick, why did you want to do that?
Glory, fame, all the wrong reasons when I was younger, probably. No, I mean, look, I'm of a similar age to a lot of the men and women who went over to Iraq and Afghanistan to fight, and I saw my generation, and their wars, and their very connected wars, and to me, it really was important to me as a journalist to cover what I thought was kind of the story of my generation. Sure. That sounds very lofty. I was also in my 20s, and it sounded like a big adventure. That's a knock on myself there. That's not the right reason to go do these things, but, war kind of draws you in that way. But, I thought it was a really important story. I still do think it is an extremely important story, especially for that generation. Once I was over there, I covered kind of every aspect of the war. But the thing that really I keep thinking back to now that I'm covering these movements in America is you definitely had an extremely different society in both countries than you do in America, but you did have a lot of, quote unquote militias. You had armed groups controlling territory. And in this case, it was much more advanced than what we have, in that you had armed groups that really did have power. And I saw that firsthand. I remember covering stories about warlords who would grab land, where they'd literally just go and squat on somebody's land with a bunch of guys with AK-47s and say, this is now my land. And if you didn't have the guns to oppose that, well, then your land is gone. So, it's a messy connection, and I'm not saying it's exactly the same thing. But when I started seeing armed groups in America really starting to assert themselves, it did make me think of these groups that kind of controlled territory that was out of the reach of the federal government in Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's something that certainly gives me pause.
I can only imagine, seeing even any similarities over at home to what you saw there, I'm sure it gives you more than pause. It's scary, obviously, to see what's happening here, which is why what you are doing is really important. Tell me a little bit before we get into the podcast. I'd love to talk to you at another time more about your reporting over there, because I'm sure it's still really relevant and important, and obviously informs what you're doing now. But your new podcast I really want to promote it, because I think it's important. I think people doing the work that you're doing is important, and I'll kind of explain why, but I want to hear your reason for why. Extremely American is not only an interesting podcast, but it's the subject matter that you are talking about in every episode. So far, there are 7. They're really fun, easy to listen to. It's called Extremely American, and why is it in the public's interest is the question I'm trying to get to, Heath. Sorry.
Yeah. No, it's a good question. And, it's sort of a constant tightrope walk in covering far right and movements and extremism in the U.S. I have to make sure that I'm covering an important story and not just sort of covering something tittillating and, giving a platform maybe to folks who might have some dangerous ideas. I think that's a tightrope, a tough one to walk. But it kind of gets back to what I was talking about before, when I started seeing these guys become a fixture at state capitals, and even being pulled into state senators and state representatives' offices to help craft legislation, and then even running for office themselves. That's when I really was like, okay, we can ignore these guys, but they're not going away. In fact, they're becoming more powerful. And believe it or not, I actually started working on this podcast a little bit before the January 6th insurrection.
Oh, wow.
It seems like I would have started it because of that, but I didn't. I kind of saw these things creeping up, and then January 6th happened, and I was like, well, okay, this is more important than ever. This is, we're sort of seeing what can happen. And I think we have to pay attention because not only are they not going away, but you have a lot of politicians who are embracing them now. And a lot of the politicians who maybe aren't comfortable with them, I think are less and less comfortable speaking out against them because these guys are gaining political power. Now, I think we'll probably talk more about this later, but are they gaining power nationally? A little bit. Are they gaining power at the state level? Yeah, a little bit more. But what I'm really seeing is they're looking at their community level governments and they're having a lot of success. And when you start having power at the community level, I think that's a kind of power that you will feel more tangibly if you live in that community than, say, if there's a Marjorie Taylor Greene embracing QAnon in D.C. Not that she doesn't matter, but you're not necessarily going to feel Marjorie Taylor Greene's influence in your community in, say, New Jersey Illinois.
Say another thing about that, Heath, more specifically, because regular listeners know that I'm in that fight personally in my community. I talk openly about it. I post on Facebook about it. It is at the Board of Education meetings. It's about our schools. It's to some extent about town board as well, but more right now, most imminently and urgently, it's the school board. And I think that is exactly what you're talking about, but I'm imagining. Mm-hmm. But what? Give me an example of something that maybe you talked about on the show or that you've covered. That's at that community level that you're describing.
Yeah, school boards are ground zero for this, and there's a lot of examples all over the country. One of the episodes actually deals with this rural island in Washington State, out in Puget Sound. And a militia there, a 3% chapter, they took over a Grange Hall first. And if people aren't familiar with Granges, they're these agricultural themed community associations, but they really kind of act as community centers in a lot of rural areas. And they're very important that way. So this militia took over the Grange Hall and it stopped anyone who didn't agree with them from joining and really caused a rift in the community. And then their next move was to run candidates to form a majority on the school board. I won't ruin the ending for you. It was a very heated race between some more liberal and centrist candidates and these militia-backed candidates for the school board. But man, I mean, it really became a fight for the soul of the island. And you are seeing that repeated all over the place, and people might not know it because, school board races usually don't make national news. And it's beyond school boards, right? It's races that, I mean, how many people know that you elect library board members? And it's different in every community, but there's a lot of library boards that are actually elected. Well, you're starting to see stories pop up of books being taken out of libraries. That's the same fight. You see these guys. They look for low turnout off-year elections like library boards and school boards where a lot of people don't pay attention and they know they're winnable. And it's a very savvy move politically because can most of these guys get a seat in Congress? Probably not. And man, that takes a lot of money. And it's just, you have to work very hard to be one out of hundreds of congressmen and senators, right?
Yeah, you need a million, more than $1 million in most districts in the country to run for the national office for a seat in the House. Sorry.
Right, and in the end, if you're in Congress, you're still not going to be able to change the curriculum at your local school.
Right.
You're on the school board.
Right.
You sure can.
And that's, by the way, that's episode 3, folks. Episode 3 is what we just heard Heath talk about, and South Whidbey Island, right? It's titled Home in the Grange. Yeah. So my other question specifically about the podcast is you actually interview extremists, and you make them sound human, Heath. Not sure.
Well, I mean, they are. And
yes, of course they are. And that's the point. The concern about conflict, and I'm sure you can speak to this as both a reporter in Iraq and especially in Afghanistan, and as probably a historian in terms of civil wars begin when you're able to dehumanize other people that actually even look like you. Not even, I mean, we could talk about whites and on whites before we get to,
Rwanda or some other place here in America, whites on blacks, or some kind of race war. But the point is, you are humanizing these people. You are hearing their point of view. I think you're doing it in context. And of course, you're bringing on perspectives on your podcast as well that will push back on what I think is insanity in terms of their ideology. It's autocracy. It's white supremacism. It's just this anti-government kind of, well, everybody knows, but you bring them on. They sound human. I can understand their concerns, and that can be concerning. Sorry for talking so much. I know that's an important question as to how you're doing this.
Yeah, and I mean, they are obviously humans with families and often kids in the schools that they're running candidates for school board in. And, a lot of people probably disagree pretty strongly with them. But I think what's also interesting is that there's a real wide range of views among these guys. You might not be surprised to know that a central message and central authority is not the strong suit of anti-government movements. So you'll find that these guys have very different views. I will say, the guys in Whidbey Island, they very strongly rejected any kind of racism, any kind of supremacy. And, I certainly have seen where they put that into action. Now, you do have groups that also promote that stuff. I mean, you've got a 3% chapter in Georgia that's got the Confederate flag in their logo. So it's a real mixed bag. But I think maybe more importantly, was I trying to humanize these guys? I mean, I was just trying to present them as they are. I think more importantly is presenting them as they are and letting them explain themselves gives a window into why their message is resonating with at least enough people to win some of these elections. Because at the end of the day, I think that's what's important. I want listeners to understand that you can hate this message, you can think it's crazy, but people are being receptive. And I think sometimes maybe people who don't even necessarily fully agree with these guys are angry and they want to see something different. I think a lot of people feel that America is changing and they're uncomfortable with it. Now, I'm not saying that's right. I'm not saying that there's a problem with a changing America. I mean, I think we're a melting pot and that's how it is, right? I mean, we're going to change. We've changed constantly over centuries and that's great. But people feel uncomfortable with it. And I think sometimes these guys are willing to say things that other politicians aren't willing to say. And that resonates with a certain segment of the public.
How much of the movement, I know it's hard to narrow it down. Is diffuse a word? Is that a word to describe?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, that's a good word to describe this movement. Yes.
And so it's hard to say any one thing about him, obviously. But it does seem that racism, and I mean, I think we don't talk enough about sexism, just kind of a patriarchy, as well as I think a lot of times like overt religion. What are some of the Venn diagrams, or you could pick an episode if you want to talk about that, but what are some of the main ideologies that do overlap?
So I will say for militia groups, I would say more militia groups at least ostensibly reject racism than don't. Now, what you will see is they definitely reject what they see as PC culture, and they'll say things that for plenty of folks will be offensive. So it kind of depends where you draw that line.
But do they reject people of color in their groups? How many of these groups or how many people of color are even involved in this movement that you can, not how many, obviously you hadn't counted them, but I feel like you could, because I feel like there's not many, but I don't cover this.
So look, it's a largely white movement, but there are people of color in the movement. And episode 1, where I go to a small training in the woods where there were, now I'm blanking. There were about 10 people there. There was a black member of the group. Now, I am not trying to gloss over the point that it is a very heavily white movement, but I would say overt racism in these groups, it's not always the case. Now, when you go to a group like the Proud Boys, I think you get a lot more overt sexism and bigotry, although even the Proud Boys are led by a person of color. It gets complicated. So there are definitely views that these groups have that are extremely offensive to a wide swath of Americans. There's no question about that. But I would say their founding principles actually don't have to do with that as much as they have to do with a radical view of gun rights and a radical view of limits on the power of the federal government. If I were to pick two things that unite these groups, I would pick those. They think that any, even small restriction on firearms is basically tyranny, and that their ability to own firearms and theoretically fight violently with the government, if they decide they're tyrannical, is a red line for them. So that's a really important thing to remember with the militia movement. From guns flow all other rights.
Really important points, and that's a great one. That's a great common thread that it does seem in most of your episodes and in much of the movement is a huge issue. I mean, you have, which one was this? The episode with the guy who was in Nevada with the Bundys, who is now running for office. I mean, fucking fascinating story there. But of course, that was, about federal government property rights, ostensibly, it seemed. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more to that. But property rights, obviously, are a big thing. He's a cattle grazer. He wasn't paying his taxes, having to pay taxes, all of it. And I just, when does it become armed? When do they, at what point will my community that currently is not, griping about guns so much, they're more worried about, say, CRT. How does that evolution evolve? Or do they start with gun rights? Is that a question that you can even answer? Sorry, that's a tough one.
No, it's a great question. I mean, the problem is that in their minds, they decide when it's time for the guns. In their minds, they decide what is tyranny, what is unconstitutional. And so, it really depends. I mean, for Eric Parker, the state Senate candidate that you were talking about, who went to the Bundy's ranch, he brought his AR-15 to Bunkerville, Nevada, and his red line was the government seizing cattle for unpaid fees, and fees that the cattle rancher Cliven Bundy admitted he didn't pay because he didn't believe he had to. So in that case, Eric Parker decided that it was worth bringing his gun and pointing it at federal agents because they were seizing cattle. So
in that episode,
CRT.
in that episode, I'm sorry to jump in, Heath. We have a tiny delay. I would have let you, but in that episode, you ask him. There's a good example of what you were talking about earlier. With listen, I try to write it down here. You're trying to not necessarily. It wasn't about humanizing them, but allow them to basically state their case, get to know why they and yet. This guy said, I mean, you had him say it on the podcast that he doesn't believe that he lives in the United States of America. He believes he lives in the country of Idaho.
Yeah.
And that's an example of we listen to the podcast and I say, well, that's a crazy thing to say. I don't live in America. I live in the country of Idaho. That one moment I feel like illustrated the point you're trying to make is you let them say what they believe. And then the listener hears it and goes, okay, that's what we're dealing with. So I just wanted to, in that episode, that was one of those, I think, moments that helps show the listener what you're doing as a journalist and certainly editorially including. It's a super important moment to understand his ideology. So you were making that point about maybe that you were pivoting towards the CRT thing when I jumped in, I think.
Well, you brought that up and it's important, actually. You're asking about bigotry, you're asking about racism, and I think sometimes we misunderstand where that comes in here. And I will say, when it comes to critical race theory, that is something that does drive these groups crazy. And, plenty of people would argue that, well, it drives them crazy because they're uncomfortable with the uncomfortable truths about racism in this country. And, where you will also see these groups, I would say very often come out with some bigoted statements is around transgender rights.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, it really drives them crazy. And they talk a lot about pronouns and get really derogatory about that. And that and CRT for them all gets tied into what they think. They think kids are being indoctrinated basically in this country. And that's why they're looking at school boards. I think they're afraid that kids are going to grow up questioning whether America is this perfect utopia of democracy that we sometimes like to think it is. And that feels really threatening to them. For whatever reason, they see that existentially.
The CRT thing overwhelmingly is the interpretation that they're getting is that their kids are being taught that they are at fault for the situation of black folks today, and they should feel guilty, and that they're at some extent you hear them saying that they're inferior. And the overall narrative that is clearly forming from Trump to my school board meeting is that they are the ones who are the victims of discrimination. And if you believe those things in your heart of hearts, which it seems they do, you can start to understand at least where their fear comes from. Of course, it's all bullshit. But, and even if my kid does feel uncomfortable, that's a parenting issue that we should talk about. But, the idea that white folks are somehow being targeted, discriminated against, marginalized or minimized is what they're being told. It's what they feel. And I'm sure you hear a lot of that.
Yes, I do. And the acronym CRT came up a lot. That is definitely, that has become a real battleground for them. And I didn't hear anything positive said about that for sure. And I certainly didn't hear a lot of people being receptive to the idea that actually CRT is probably not really being taught in schools, certainly not elementary schools. They definitely bought into this idea that it is being taught and that it needs to be fought at all costs.
Right. Well, it's easy, though. Of course, they don't know what it necessarily means. And it's not being taught. But what is being taught is basically the same thing. Any mention of race, any mention of, a lot of different things, they interpret as this catch-all called CRT. That's how it's being communicated. That's how it's being received. And that's how it's obviously animating them and putting so much behind them. So in terms of, what we've seen so far, maybe just mention one more episode or person that you talked to or something that we learn when listening to your new podcast, Extremely American. Why is it named that, by the way? I love it.
I'm a big fan of puns and wordplay. And to me, it kind of said, depending on your perspective, what you think about these guys, right? You either think that they're extremists, or you might think they're the most American thing since apple pie because they're bringing it back to what the founders intended. So that was the idea. It's just, a double entendre to kind of get at different perspectives on the militia movement. You asked about another episode. I think it's maybe important to talk a little bit about the people who are battling these guys. Just so people know, it's not just militia members and their perspectives. In episode 9, you get to meet a couple of people who are very different from each other, a conservative rancher and a kind of Democratic-leaning former Navy guy / law school dean, who are both fighting extremism in Idaho. And it's very interesting to me to see these guys because they've caught on to the fact that everything's happening at the local level. And so it's interesting to get into their heads and see what they're doing, going down to, fighting against sheriff candidates, fighting against school board members. They're in the trenches at the local level, trying to go candidate by candidate in these local elections to put the brakes on a real rising tide of far-right candidates. And I think it's especially important to get this perspective of, there is this wing of conservatism that's kind of horrified by what's happening within their own ideological group. And to see this conservative gun-toting rancher who's fighting really hard against what she sees as extreme politics in a state like Idaho, where it's really taken hold. I found it, just even myself as a reporter, I found it really interesting to get her perspective.
Well, everybody should listen to this podcast. It's a fascinating listen. It's really well done. You guys have a pro outfit over there, unlike myself. It's just me in a shed, but it's really well produced is what I'm trying to say. And I enjoyed listening to it, the perspectives, and I'm happy to introduce it to folks here who aren't familiar with it, Heath, and I hope that you keep up the good work, and I hope to talk to you again soon, man. Thank you so much for joining me. Congrats on the podcast, and I hope everybody goes, listens, subscribes, downloads Extremely American. Heath Druzin, thank you.
Thank you so much. Great talk. I appreciate it.
All right, there he goes. Heath Druzin at H. Druzin. Check out Extremely American wherever you get your podcast. Brand new. He's got like 8 episodes posted. They're really well done. I highly recommend it. Okay, now, time to get to my final guest, folks. Yeah, that's right. I got 3 today. I always love when listeners turn into guests and help us understand something that is happening in their world, in their industry. They're an expert on something, or in their community, or in this case, their country. Carlo Sgro is a really great guy. I've known him for a while. He's been a longtime listener, supporter, subscriber of the show. He lives up in New Hamburg, Ontario, Canada, a small town about an hour west of Toronto, but I think I said mistaken. He said he lived in Western Canada. I got that wrong, but he's been a listener for a long time, since the very beginning when I started at Sirius on the Indie Talk channel. He's married to an American woman, follows American politics. Professionally, he's been a professor of software engineering technology at Conestoga College in Waterloo, Ontario for the past 21 years. And he'd love to see more Americans, he says, join this program to prepare them for a great career in software development. You can find out more about Carlo in today's show notes. He's on Twitter at @ThisOneCarlo. And I called him up last night. I was like, he had sent me this long email about it all because I asked about it on yesterday's podcast. And so if you're interested in this, I think you're going to really like my conversation with Carlo Sgro, a longtime listener up there in old Canada.
Hey, Pete.
Carlo in Canada. I just thought, since you wrote me this really detail-oriented email after I said on yesterday's podcast, I really want to learn what's happening in Canada. I don't know if you heard my interview with Stephen Marsh a couple weeks ago, but we talked a little bit about Canada and this new book about the potential of civil war. But I just thought your email was a real addendum to a lot of things, and you put so much into it. I figured I'd just call you and tape it and see how you are at talking. If you're as good at talking about it as you are researching it and putting this email, we're good.
Okay, sounds good. And if it doesn't work out, that's cool.
No, I think it's fine. Whatever. I'm gonna play it either way because you're awesome and you've been a long time supporter and friend of the show. So I trust you. Like, I want to get your perspective on this, and you give me all kinds of links and everything. But basically, this Canadian truckers protest has become, it started with kind of opposition to COVID regulations. But now, as you say, and I've heard, it's kind of branched out into some more traditional right-wing kind of positions, including, as you write, calling for the reformation, restructuring of the federal government. Like, how many of these, I mean, are these Canadian truckers, and how popular is there of a movement, or is this a fringe in terms of things like that, reformation and restructuring? Or, as you call it, there's one movement for like Wexit, like Brexit for Western Canada or something?
Yeah, and mostly Alberta. So it is absolute. The things that you mentioned after the initial issue, that's all fringe for sure. So the people who want to take over the government, basically, but not by force, but voluntarily have the government disband themselves and have the Governor General sort of be the figurehead, and then there would be a more or less a committee of people who would now become the new government. It's crazy. So that is very, very, very much a fringe.
Right. Okay. Well, that's, I guess, good. But I mean, I thought somebody like the Ottawa political leaders were talking about, or maybe national leaders were talking about how dangerous this seemed like it was potentially about to get, and then there was some weapons and some like fuel bombs that were being. I mean, so you're saying that it's not really, we're not too concerned about a violent kind of insurrection, but a lot of people are already comparing it to January 6th and saying it could get worse. Or why are you not as concerned? Or maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're saying.
You're slightly misinterpreting what I'm saying, because I was talking more in terms of the ideas that are behind the movement as a whole. But in terms of the protest itself, it's mostly peaceful, but not completely.
Right.
And from a Canadian point of view, not completely is not okay.
Right.
So, as an example, as I mentioned in my email, they were throwing rocks at an ambulance, and then they were, yelling racial things at the paramedic when he came out to try and see what happened with the ambulance, and just there were a lot of aggression, I would guess is the best way to put it.
What is what is happening? It's a bunch of truckers just like clogging up streets and honking their horns all night. Those kind of protests, no matter what they're for, whether they're environmentalists or Black Lives Matter or Occupy, they oftentimes really backfire because we can argue about it, but you're inconveniencing people. And oftentimes it's not worth the trouble that you're going through for your cause. I mean, how do you think it's being received in Ottawa and around the country?
It's not received well at all. There's a large backlash, but we really want to avoid violence. We don't want things to get out of control. So the Ottawa police and RCMP, etc., have really stayed back and not done anything to try and provoke anything. People are very bothered by what's happening there. People are disturbed by the noise. I read one posting on Facebook by someone who said that the noise goes from first thing in the morning until nighttime, but then it ends at night. And I've read another thing that says, no, it doesn't end at night. It keeps going. So it's really hard to say. I'm not there. I'm probably a good 5-hour drive away from Ottawa. And not that I would go anyway.
Why? What are you saying about Ottawa?
Well, I love Ottawa. I've got family there. It's a great place. It's a beautiful place. Last time I was there were people playing road hockey in front of the Parliament buildings.
Okay.
It's a great place, but you wouldn't want to go there now.
Got it. I see what you're saying.
And I think there's a lot of truckers, but I think there's a lot of people who are not truckers as well. And I think that's part of the problem.
How big of a deal is this in Canadian media? Is it a top story?
Pretty much. Yeah, it's very significant.
Do you think they're gaining support around the nation and around the world, or do you think that that would be a tough question for even a journalist covering it? But what's your sense of it?
I don't think they are as much as they want. I think that they have more support than before they started, because there are people who are getting basically COVID fatigue. And that's all over the place. That
that's I think that's all everywhere. I mean,
it's crazy. Like, people are tired of it, but at the same time, we don't want to. We don't want to risk our lives either. So when we go outside and into a store, we wear a mask, 100%. Well, let's say 95%. Last time I went into a store and saw a person without a mask probably was 3 weeks ago. And I'm double vaccinated plus the booster. A lot of people are. I think we're somewhere around 85 to 90%. With double vaccinated, and we've got a lot of boosters as well. I might be wrong on the figures. I don't know, but that's the idea. So a lot of people are starting to get tired of the entire thing, and the core original motivation was the problem where both the U.S. government and the Canadian government were saying that truckers needed to be fully vaccinated in order to cross the border. And according to a major trucking industry organization, I don't remember which one it was offhand, like 80 to 90% of truckers are fully vaccinated. So it's not an issue. But there are some people who aren't. And those are some of the people who are there, plus people who would support them. And I think if that was the only issue, there would be a lot more sympathy for the people who are protesting.
Somebody might say, why do truckers have to be vaccinated? They don't come in contact with a lot of people, but the reason is if they don't get vaccinated, they're going to get sick and they won't be able to drive their truck, and then we'll have a shortage and we won't be able to get things where they need to be. And it shows how important they are, by the way. But I mean, I think that's at least one good example. What about Justin Trudeau? How's he handling this? This is, your opinion. I don't know if you're a fan of the prime minister there, but he seemed to come out and give a pretty vociferous defense against these protests. He doesn't seem to have a lot of patience for him. It sounds not as bad or as harsh, but his boy in France, Macron, who basically is like, I want to make these people miserable, whatever. But that seems to be kind of the prevailing attitude with certain countries, the ones that speak at least partially French. What do you think of Trudeau?
Personally, I like Trudeau. I think he's good. He definitely has elements of his father, but his father would have had I think a more aggressive approach towards it. I think that Trudeau is handling it well. A lot of people think that Trudeau is handling it well, but you will always get the Trudeau haters, and you can't do anything about that.
Sure.
And some people will hate him because his name is Trudeau.
Sure.
And others will hate him because he's French. Others will hate him because he's liberal.
I hate him because he's beautiful.
Well, Melania thought so too.
Is that right? Yeah.
Oh yeah. You haven't seen that photo?
Yes, I absolutely have. Love it. Love it. She looks at him the same way I'd look at him.
Well,
so you think he's handled this well, Carlo?
I think he's handled it as well as he could. Not perfectly, and I can't really say what I would do to improve it or what really he's done badly about it. It really could be a lot worse. And I think that the approach of the Ottawa police and Ottawa mayor, etc., is quite good. They're being very patient. Now they're trying to say, okay, we've just about had enough, so we're going to try and embargo their fuel,
right,
etc. Because if they don't have
they're
gas
choking
to run
off
their trucks.
their kind of their supply there now, right? They're starting to be like, all right, that's enough. Let's move it now. By the way, is this a major artery border crossing there in Ottawa? I mean, I'm sure there are several ones across.
It's not a border.
What's that?
It's not a border.
Oh, what are we talking about?
No, we're talking about border crossing, but Ottawa is not on a border crossing. They went to Ottawa because Ottawa is the capital of the but Ottawa is probably a good 2 hours or so maybe anywhere from 1 hour to 2 hours from the U.S. border.
So I mean, obviously, I knew that, Carlo.
Obviously,
I want to see if you knew that Ottawa wasn't on the border. Is it that? I'm looking at the map now. Yeah, it's is it a couple hours from the border, huh? Is that what you said?
Yeah, ballpark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's the capital, which is why they're bringing attention. They're clogging the streets and disrupting the nation's capital.
Yeah. Yeah. There were, for example, there was a major shopping mall that never closes. That closed because they was just too disruptive. It wasn't safe for people.
Right. They're losing a lot of money, businesses, right? You wrote also.
Absolutely. And the Ottawa mayor declared a state of emergency, I guess, to prepare for what might be happening next. Honestly, I could see the protesters running out of incentive to be there.
Yeah.
If not running out of gas. But there was a protest at a border crossing, I think in Pembina, which is out west. It might be That might be in Alberta. I'm not exactly sure. Because like from here, it's probably like a 3 or 4 day drive to there. So there was a problem there, and they clogged up the border, and people were very unhappy about that.
Yeah, well, can you blame them? Especially at this point. All right, Carlo. Well, listen, I really appreciate the email and your insight and you reaching out to me. It really helped me gain a lot more clarity on it, and so did our conversation, I'm sure, for anybody listening. So thank you very much for joining me, for always being such an awesome, great, thoughtful listener and our Canadian correspondent. There are many, but Carlo is, I think, probably clearly the one I talk to the most vocal, and I really appreciate it, man.
Hey, my pleasure. Thanks for calling.
That's Carlo. He's in Canada.
Stand up.
There you go, Carlo Sgro in Canada. And if you want to go into software engineering, then check out the program at Conestoga College in Waterloo, Ontario, about an hour west of Toronto. At this one, Carlo. Wow, what a show, huh? JL Cauvin, Heath Druzin, Carlo Sgro. Thank you, Garrett Sever, for the new jingle, Pete Coe for the voiceovers, and obviously, as always, the great John Carroll, the legend, for the music. All of you for your support on the show. I can't do it without you. Sign up now for a subscription if you haven't already. Hope to see you Thursday night at the Hangout. Meet Carrie and I at Windham Mountain in the Catskills Thursday. We're gonna go skiing and snowboarding this Thursday, right? Right, Carrie? Looking forward to that. And that's all I've got for you. That's it. Those are the plugs. Love you guys. I'll talk to you tomorrow. Thank you. Looking at conversations with Wajid Ali and Eric Siegel on tomorrow's podcast. Maybe more. Looking forward. Bye-bye.
So long, you got the creaky knees. You got to stand up. Stand up. I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know us right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. This is the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We got to let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.